The strangest moments in life are often the ones that quietly decide our future before we even realize they matter. The first Monday in October arrived with a cool breeze rolling across Crystal Lake, carrying the scent of pine trees and fresh coffee through the elegant grounds of Hayes Grand Resort. Golden sunlight stretched across the water as guests enjoyed peaceful morning walks, unaware that before breakfast was over, two lives would collide in a way neither could ever predict. Ethan Carter tightened the straps on his weathered toolbox before climbing out of his aging pickup truck in the employee parking lot. At 38 years old, he no longer measured success by promotions or expensive possessions. Success meant packing Emma's lunch every morning, remembering to braid her hair well enough that she would smile before school, and making every promise he gave his 8-year-old daughter. Before leaving home that morning, Emma had hugged him tightly and whispered, "Do not forget my music recital tonight." Ethan had smiled, gently brushing a loose strand of blonde hair away from her face. "I have never missed one," he promised, "and I never will." Those words stayed with him as he entered the maintenance building, greeting coworkers with his usual quiet smile before checking the day's work orders. Most repairs were routine until his radio suddenly crackled with urgency. "Maintenance Supervisor Carter, we have a possible plumbing emergency on the executive floor. Water has been reported near Suite 2112. Please respond immediately." Ethan reached for his master key, lifted his toolbox, and headed toward the elevators without hesitation. Water damage inside a luxury resort could spread within minutes, and waiting often meant thousands of dollars in repairs. The executive hallway was unusually quiet when he arrived. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the sparkling lake while fresh orchids decorated every corner. A young concierge hurried toward him, breathing slightly faster than normal. Engineering updated the room assignment after housekeeping. She explained quickly while handing him a printed work order. "Suite 2112. Please, hurry." Ethan nodded politely. "Thank you." He walked briskly toward the suite, stopping outside the elegant wooden door. Following standard procedure, he knocked firmly twice. "Maintenance," he called clearly, entering for emergency service. Silence answered him. He waited several more seconds before using the master key. The door opened only a few inches. Everything that followed happened almost instantly. Inside, Charlotte Hayes had just returned from the Resort Fitness Center and was changing into business attire before a full day of executive meetings. Startled by the unexpected sound, she instinctively reached for a nearby robe. Ethan immediately lowered his eyes toward the polished floor the instant he realized the room was occupied. "I'm so sorry," he said at once. "Wrong room. I am leaving." He stepped backward without another glance and gently closed the door behind him. His heart pounded with embarrassment, but he never attempted to explain or linger. Less than 2 seconds had passed. As Ethan turned away, the elevator doors opened at the far end of the hallway. 2 security officers, responding to a nearby executive protocol alert, noticed the unexpected movement outside the suite and quickly walked toward him. Several hotel employees paused in confusion. Charlotte remained inside, equally surprised, trying to understand what had just happened. None of them realized that discreet hallway cameras had quietly recorded every second from Ethan's arrival with his toolbox to his immediate retreat after recognizing the mistake. Standing calmly beside his toolbox while security approached, Ethan felt the weight of unfamiliar eyes settling upon him. He had no idea that the woman inside that suite was not simply another guest. She was the billionaire owner of the entire Hayes Hospitality Group. And before the morning was over, one innocent mistake would begin changing his life forever. The executive hallway remained unusually quiet after the brief misunderstanding, yet the silence felt heavier than raised voices ever could. Ethan Carter stood exactly where the security officers had politely asked him to remain, his weathered toolbox resting beside his. Boots while sunlight continued pouring through the towering windows overlooking Crystal Lake. He took one slow breath and folded his hands in front of him, not because anyone had instructed him to do so, but because years of raising Emma alone had taught him that staying calm often accomplished more than speaking too quickly. One of the officers approached with a respectful expression rather than suspicion. "Mr. Carter, we just need to understand what happened." Ethan nodded once. "I receive an emergency maintenance dispatch for a possible plumbing leak in Suite 2112. I knocked, announced myself, waited several seconds, opened the door after receiving no response, realized someone was inside, apologized immediately, and left." His explanation was steady, simple, and complete. He added nothing that was unnecessary and made no attempt to defend himself beyond the truth. The officer made a few notes before asking another question. "Did you know who the guest was?" "No, sir," Ethan answered honestly. "Did you remain inside the room?" "No, sir." "Did you return to the doorway afterward?" "No, sir." The officer thanked him and stepped aside. The conversation had lasted less than 2 minutes, yet word had already begun spreading through the resort. Two housekeepers quietly exchanged uncertain glances while replacing fresh towels down the hallway. A concierge lowered her voice while speaking with another employee. Several guests looked toward Ethan before continuing on their way. Luxury resorts often appeared peaceful on the surface, but rumors traveled through elegant hallways just as quickly as anywhere else. Ethan noticed the curious looks without responding to them. There were still broken locks to repair, air conditioning systems waiting for inspection, and dozens of guests depending on the staff to make their vacations memorable. His responsibility had not changed simply because people did not yet know the full story. Inside another executive suite several floors above, Charlotte Hayes stood beside a wide window overlooking the sparkling lake after finishing her morning preparations. The unexpected interruption replayed quietly in her thoughts. She remembered the instant the door had opened. She remembered the man immediately lowering his eyes instead of staring. She remembered hearing an apology before the door gently closed again. There had been surprise, certainly, but there had been no hesitation in his decision to leave. Her executive assistant, Rebecca Collins, entered carrying a digital tablet filled with meeting schedules. "Security has completed their initial report," Rebecca said. "Would you like to review it before the board meeting?" Charlotte remained thoughtful. "What did the maintenance supervisor say?" Rebecca glanced at her notes. "He stated exactly what happened and accepted responsibility for opening the wrong door. But he insisted it was an emergency dispatch and left immediately after realizing the room was occupied." Charlotte slowly walked toward the window again. "Did he argue?" "No." "Did he ask to speak with me?" "No." "Did he try to justify himself?" Rebecca shook her head. "Not once." Charlotte looked across the calm autumn water where a pair of sailboats drifted quietly beneath the clear blue sky. Something about the man's restraint did not fit the assumptions that naturally followed such an awkward moment. Downstairs, Ethan received another maintenance request involving a heating system inside the lakeside restaurant. Without mentioning the incident to anyone, he picked up his toolbox and walked toward the next building with the same steady pace he always had. One young employee watched him leave before quietly asking an older engineer, "How can he stay so calm?" The engineer smiled faintly while tightening a wrench. "Because people who know their own character rarely feel the need to prove it. They simply keep doing the next right thing." The following morning arrived beneath a sky painted with pale shades of blue and gold as gentle mist floated across Crystal Lake, wrapping Hayes Grand Resort in a quiet beauty that seemed untouched by yesterday's misunderstanding. Ethan Carter parked his aging pickup truck in the employee lot before sunrise, just as he did every weekday. Before stepping out, he unfolded a small sheet of paper Emma had slipped into his lunchbox the night before. In careful handwriting surrounded by tiny music notes she had drawn herself, it read, "Good luck today, Daddy. Remember to smile." Ethan smiled without realizing it, folded the note carefully, and tucked it safely inside his shirt pocket before beginning another long day. Inside the resort, guests gathered around the breakfast terrace overlooking the lake while fresh coffee filled the cool autumn air. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above polished marble floors, and soft piano music drifted through the grand lobby. To anyone visiting for the first time, everything appeared flawless. Yet beneath the elegant atmosphere, curious whispers still lingered among a handful of employees. Ethan noticed the occasional glance in his direction, but never allowed it to interrupt his work. He greeted every coworker exactly as he always had, carrying the same quiet confidence that came from knowing he had done nothing wrong. Mid-morning brought a series of routine maintenance requests that carried him across nearly every corner of the property. He repaired a loose handrail beside the lakeside walking path before helping a young housekeeper move a heavy supply cart that had become stuck on an uneven stone walkway. When she thanked him repeatedly, Ethan simply smiled. "We all have enough work already," he said gently. "Helping each other makes the day easier." A few minutes later, an elderly guest struggled to lift 2 heavy suitcases from shuttle cart outside the main entrance. Before the bell staff even noticed, Ethan quietly set down his toolbox and carried the luggage inside without being asked. The older gentleman reached into his wallet, but Ethan politely shook his head. "Please keep it," he said. "Enjoy your vacation instead." High above the entrance on a private balcony, Charlotte Hayes watched the entire exchange without revealing herself. She had stepped outside only to clear her thoughts before another executive meeting. Yet once again she found herself observing the same maintenance supervisor. There was no audience applauding his kindness. No supervisor standing nearby. No opportunity for recognition. Every generous gesture seemed to come as naturally to him as breathing. Charlotte remained thoughtful as Ethan disappeared around the corner toward another repair request. Later that afternoon, she crossed the garden courtyard on her way back from an inspection meeting when another unexpected moment caught her attention. A little boy chasing a bright red toy airplane accidentally dropped it into the decorative fountain at the center of the courtyard. His disappointed face fell instantly as the toy floated just beyond his reach. Ethan happened to be passing nearby. Without hesitation, he removed his work gloves, carefully reached into the shallow water, retrieved the toy, dried it with a clean cloth from his toolbox, and handed it back with a warm smile. The child hugged the airplane tightly before throwing his arms around Ethan's waist in gratitude. Ethan laughed softly and reminded him to keep the airplane away from fountains next time. Charlotte found herself smiling before she even realized it. The image before her no longer matched the assumptions she had carried since that uncomfortable morning. As the afternoon sunlight shimmered across the lake and autumn leaves drifted slowly through the air, she began to understand something that no security report could ever explain. Character could not be manufactured for appearances. It quietly revealed itself through ordinary moments when nobody believed anyone important was watching. By the end of the week, the brilliant colors of autumn had settled across Crystal Lake, turning every walking trail surrounding Hayes Grand Resort into a painting of crimson, amber, and gold. Guests paused to admire the peaceful scenery, while photographers captured the morning reflections dancing across the still water. Inside the executive offices, however, Charlotte Hayes found herself distracted by something far more unexpected than another quarterly report. Instead of reviewing financial projections before her afternoon meeting, she quietly closed her laptop and walked toward the Human Resources Department with a single question resting in her mind. She had built one of the largest hospitality companies in the country by trusting evidence instead of assumptions. Yet she could not ignore the growing feeling that she had misunderstood the quiet maintenance supervisor from the very beginning. Human Resources Director Susan Miller welcomed her into a small conference room before placing Ethan Carter's employment file on the polished oak table. Charlotte opened the folder without speaking. The first pages contained routine information, but the deeper she read, the more the ordinary paperwork transformed into the story of a remarkable man. 8 consecutive years of outstanding performance evaluations. Dozens of handwritten guest compliments praising his honesty, patience, and kindness. Records showing that he regularly volunteered for holiday shifts so coworkers with young families could stay home. There were no complaints, no disciplinary actions, no requests for special treatment. Susan noticed Charlotte lingering over several handwritten letters. "Our guests remember him," she said quietly. "Not because he fixes things, because he makes people feel respected." Charlotte continued reading. One letter described how Ethan had spent nearly an hour helping an elderly veteran repair a broken wheelchair after finishing his scheduled shift, refusing every attempt to accept payment. Another family wrote that their little daughter's treasured stuffed rabbit had accidentally fallen behind a massive laundry machine, and Ethan had carefully taken apart the equipment just to retrieve it before bedtime. Charlotte slowly turned another page and paused. Attached near the back of the file was an emergency contact form listing only one name. Emma Carter, daughter, 8 years old, no spouse, no additional family member. Charlotte looked towards Susan. He never remarried. Susan gently shook her head. His wife passed away 4 years ago after a sudden illness. Since then, Emma has been his entire world. Charlotte lowered her eyes to the folder again. Does he ever talk about it? Only when someone asks about his daughter. He says every day is an opportunity to keep one more promise to her. Those words lingered quietly in the room. As Charlotte left Human Resources later that afternoon, she happened to glance through the lobby windows toward the employee parking lot. Ethan was placing his toolbox into the back of his pickup truck while repeatedly checking the time on his watch. Instead of driving home, he headed toward Maple Grove Elementary School across town. Curiosity overcame routine. Charlotte asked her driver to take the longer route past the school before returning to the resort. Families filled the sidewalks, carrying flowers, cameras, and folding chairs for the annual elementary music recital. Through the open gymnasium doors, Charlotte spotted Ethan hurrying inside with a small bouquet of bright yellow sunflowers wrapped in simple brown paper. Emma saw him immediately from across the room. Her face lit up with unmistakable joy as she ran into his arms. Ethan handed her the flowers with an apologetic smile. Almost hit traffic, he said softly. Emma hugged him tightly. You still made it. Ethan smiled. I promised you I would. Charlotte remained seated quietly inside the car as laughter drifted from the school building into the cool autumn air. For the first time in many years, she realized that the greatest measure of a person's success could not be found in boardrooms, financial statements, or titles. Sometimes it was found in something as beautifully ordinary as a father who never allowed a promise to his little girl to be broken. Monday morning arrived with clear skies stretching endlessly above Crystal Lake. Yet inside the security operations center of Hayes Grand Resort, the atmosphere carried a quiet sense of anticipation. Charlotte Hayes entered the room without her executive entourage, greeting Security Director Michael Turner with a simple nod before taking a seat in front of 3 large surveillance monitors. The polished conference table reflected the soft glow of the screens, while the steady hum of computer servers filled the otherwise silent room. Michael placed a digital tablet beside her. You asked us to preserve every recording from the executive floor last Monday morning, he said. Everything is ready. Charlotte folded her hands together. Please begin from the moment maintenance received the dispatch. The first recording appeared on the largest monitor. A timestamp showed Ethan Carter leaving the maintenance office, carrying his familiar toolbox. Another camera captured the concierge handing him the emergency work order outside the executive elevators. Charlotte watched carefully as Ethan immediately headed toward the assigned suite without hesitation. Michael switched to the hallway camera outside Suite 2112. Ethan knocked firmly twice before announcing in a clear professional voice, Maintenance. Entering for emergency service. The hallway remained completely quiet. He waited several seconds, exactly as resort policy required, before unlocking the door. Charlotte leaned slightly forward. The footage continued. The door opened only a few inches. Less than 2 seconds later, Ethan instantly lowered his eyes, stepped backward, apologized, and gently closed the door without another glance inside. Michael paused the recording. The door remained open for 1.8 seconds, he explained. We verified the timing from multiple cameras. Charlotte remained silent. Continue. Another recording from the opposite end of the hallway showed Ethan standing several feet away from the closed door immediately afterward, never attempting to look inside again. He calmly waited until the security officers arrived and answered every question with complete cooperation. Every movement matched his explanation exactly. Michael opened another report on the tablet. We also reviewed footage from every nearby camera before and after the incident. Mr. Carter walked directly from the maintenance dispatch to the assigned room and immediately proceeded to his next work assignment afterward. There is no indication that he acted with anything other than professional intent. Charlotte slowly closed her eyes for a brief moment. She remembered the embarrassment she had felt that morning. She remembered allowing uncertainty to linger even after hearing his apology. Yet the truth had been quietly waiting all along, recorded without emotion or opinion. When she looked at the screen again, she no longer saw a maintenance supervisor standing outside an executive suite. She saw a father, a hardworking employee, and a man who had carried the weight of misunderstanding without demanding sympathy or defending his pride. Michael finally spoke again. "Would you like us to archive the investigation?" Charlotte nodded gently. "Yes. Close it officially." She stood and walked toward the door before stopping one final time. "Michael." "Yes, ma'am. Please make certain that no rumor connected to this incident continues inside the resort. No one should have to carry a reputation they did not earn." "Understand." As Charlotte stepped back into the bright autumn sunlight, guests continued strolling beside the lake while children laughed near the gardens, completely unaware that the most important decision of her week had just been made inside a quiet security room. She no longer needed another report, another recording, or another opinion. The evidence had spoken clearly. More importantly, so had Ethan's character. Now, there was only one conversation left to have, and this time she intended to approach it not as the billionaire owner of the resort, but simply as one human being asking another for forgiveness that should have been offered much sooner. Late that afternoon, the golden light of early autumn stretched across Crystal Lake, turning the calm water into a sheet of shimmering amber, while a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine through the open terraces of Hayes Grand Resort. Ethan Carter was finishing the replacement of a faulty thermostat in one of the executive conference rooms when his radio crackled softly against his shoulder. "Maintenance Supervisor Carter, would you please come to the Lakeside Executive Lounge? A guest has requested a private conversation." The message sounded polite rather than urgent. Ethan gathered his tools, wiped his hands with a clean cloth, and made his way upstairs without giving the request much thought. As the elevator doors opened, he stepped into a quiet lounge framed by tall windows overlooking the lake. Charlotte Hayes stood alone beside the glass, dressed in a simple navy business suit instead of the more formal attire she usually wore during executive meetings. The afternoon sunlight reflected across the water behind her, creating an atmosphere so peaceful that even the silence felt welcoming. Ethan approached with his usual respectful smile. "Good afternoon. How may I help you?" Charlotte turned slowly to face him. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. She took one slow breath before breaking the silence. "Actually, Mr. Carter, I believe I am the one asking for your help today." Ethan looked at her with calm curiosity, but remained quiet. Charlotte folded her hands together, something she rarely did during business conversations. "I reviewed every security recording from that morning," she began gently. "I reviewed the dispatch logs, the maintenance records, and every report connected to the incident." Ethan listened without interruption. "Everything you told security was true," she continued. "You followed procedure. You waited before entering. You left immediately. You did absolutely nothing wrong." Ethan nodded almost imperceptibly. "I thought the truth would find its way eventually," he answered softly. Charlotte looked at him with genuine surprise. She had expected relief, perhaps even frustration finally released. Instead, she found only quiet peace. "You are not angry with me?" she asked. Ethan glanced through the window where a father was helping his young son feed ducks along the shoreline. "Being angry would not change what happened," he replied. "Life has already taught me that some things deserve patience more than pride." Charlotte lowered her eyes for a moment. "I owe you an apology," she said sincerely. "Not because anyone demanded it, because I allowed uncertainty to stand between us longer than it should have." Ethan smiled with gentle kindness. "You were caught by surprise. Anyone would have been. Most people would have defended themselves," Charlotte admitted. "Most people would have insisted that everyone believed them." Ethan gave a small, thoughtful smile. The truth does not become stronger because I repeat it louder. Sometimes all we can do is keep living honestly until it speaks for itself. Those words settled quietly between them. Charlotte realized she had spent years leading thousands of employees, negotiating billion-dollar contracts, and making difficult decisions every day, yet one. Maintenance supervisor had just reminded her of a lesson no business school had ever taught. She looked at him again with renewed respect. Your daughter is fortunate to have you as her father. Ethan's expression softened immediately. I believe I'm the fortunate one, he answered. Emma reminds me every morning what kind of man I want to be. Charlotte smiled warmly. I hope I have the opportunity to know both of you better someday. Ethan nodded politely, unaware of how deeply those simple words would shape the future waiting ahead. As he picked up his weathered toolbox and quietly walked toward the elevator, Charlotte remained by the window, watching him disappear behind the closing doors. For the first time in many years, she understood that true greatness was rarely announced by titles, wealth, or influence. More often, it arrived wearing worn work boots, carrying a battered toolbox, and choosing grace when resentment would have been far easier. The days that followed unfolded with a quiet rhythm neither Ethan Carter nor Charlotte Hayes had expected. The uncomfortable misunderstanding that had once stood between them gradually faded into the background, replaced by conversations that began with ordinary subjects and somehow always ended with both of them smiling a little more than before. Charlotte continued visiting different areas of Hayes Grand Resort without revealing to Ethan that she owned every building surrounding Crystal Lake. She preferred being seen simply as a guest who appreciated peaceful mornings and long walks beside the water. Ethan never questioned why she appeared so often. He simply enjoyed their conversations, believing chance had introduced him to someone who valued kindness more than appearances. One cool Saturday morning, Ethan was repairing a weathered wooden bench overlooking the lake after several autumn storms had loosened its supports. Charlotte approached, carrying 2 paper cups of fresh coffee from the small cafe near the marina. I thought you might appreciate a break, she said with an easy smile. Ethan accepted 1 cup with quiet gratitude. Thank you. That is very thoughtful. They sat together on opposite ends of the bench while gentle ripples moved across the water and a pair of white swans drifted peacefully toward the reeds. Neither of them hurried to speak. The silence felt comfortable, almost familiar. Charlotte finally looked toward the distant shoreline. Most people become uncomfortable when nobody is talking. Ethan smiled softly while watching the swans. Sometimes silence says everything that words cannot. Charlotte nodded, letting the thoughts settle between them like the falling leaves around their feet. A few days later, Ethan finished replacing several outdoor lights near the lakeside parking area, just as Charlotte discovered 1 tire on her rental sedan had gone completely flat. She laughed quietly at her own bad luck. Before she even reached for her phone, Ethan noticed her standing beside the vehicle. Looks like your afternoon changed its plans, he said with a friendly smile. Charlotte folded her arms playfully. Apparently it did. Ethan placed his toolbox beside the car and changed the tire with calm efficiency, explaining each step as though teaching an old friend rather than completing another task. When everything was finished, Charlotte reached into her purse. Ethan immediately shook his head. Please do not. She looked at him with amused surprise. You just saved me at least an hour. Neighbors help neighbors, Ethan answered. Not everything valuable needs a price. Charlotte slowly returned her wallet to her purse, realizing this was now the 2nd time he had refused money from her without hesitation. Later that week, Ethan invited Charlotte to visit the annual Harvest Festival held in Emma's elementary school gymnasium. Emma will be performing with the school choir, he explained. She would love another friendly face cheering for her. Charlotte accepted without revealing how unusual it felt for someone to invite her somewhere without knowing her title or influence. On the evening of the performance, she arrived wearing a simple cream sweater, blue jeans, and comfortable boots instead of designer business attire. Ethan introduced her only as my friend Charlotte. Emma immediately welcomed her with the complete honesty only children possess. Daddy says you like quiet places, she said with a bright smile. Charlotte laughed gently. He is right. During the festival, they shared homemade apple pie, watched children perform songs beneath colorful paper decorations, and applauded every nervous young musician as though each performance belonged on a grand stage. After the concert, Emma slipped her small hand into Charlotte's while holding Ethan's hand with the other. None of them commented on the gesture. They simply continued walking beneath the glowing streetlights toward the parking lot as cool autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves around them. For one peaceful evening, they looked less like three strangers brought together by coincidence and more like a family quietly discovering one another. While the greatest truth of all remained hidden because Ethan still believed Charlotte was simply an ordinary woman whose kindness had unexpectedly crossed paths with his own. The first week of November brought crisp morning air and brilliant blue skies to Crystal Lake, while Hayes Grand Resort prepared for its annual leadership conference. Employees from every property owned by Hayes Hospitality Group arrived throughout the morning, filling the grand ballroom with quiet conversations, polished business attire, and an atmosphere of anticipation. Fresh white lilies decorated the stage beneath glittering crystal chandeliers, and enormous windows framed the golden autumn landscape beyond the lake. Ethan Carter had no intention of attending the event. His responsibility that morning was simple. One of the ballroom projection systems had stopped working just before the conference, and the audiovisual technician needed immediate assistance. Carrying his familiar weathered toolbox, Ethan carefully replaced a damaged power module, tested the projection screens one final time, and quietly packed his equipment. "Everything should work perfectly now," he told the event coordinator with his usual modest smile. She thanked him warmly before adding, "You are welcome to stay for the opening ceremony if you would like." The company always recognizes outstanding employees during the conference. Ethan smiled politely and shook his head. "I still have several maintenance requests waiting this morning." Just as he reached the ballroom doors, the lights slowly dimmed and soft instrumental music filled the room. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "please welcome the founder, chairwoman, and chief executive officer of Hayes Hospitality Group." Every conversation stopped instantly. Hundreds of employees rose to their feet in respectful applause. Ethan turned almost absent-mindedly toward the stage, expecting to see a corporate leader he had never met before. The moment the spotlight illuminated the entrance, his footsteps froze. Charlotte Hayes walked gracefully across the stage, wearing an elegant ivory business suit, her calm confidence filling the enormous ballroom without a single unnecessary gesture. Ethan stared in complete disbelief. The woman who had shared quiet mornings beside the lake, laughed with Emma at the Harvest Festival, accepted coffee on a weathered wooden bench, and talked about ordinary life as though titles meant nothing, was now standing before hundreds of employees as the owner of the entire company. Charlotte's eyes briefly found Ethan standing near the exit, and a gentle smile touched her face before she stepped behind the podium. "Good morning, everyone," she began. Her voice carried warmth instead of authority alone. "Every year we celebrate growth, innovation, and financial success. Those achievements matter. But today I want to begin by recognizing something far more valuable: character." The ballroom became completely silent. Charlotte continued, "Several weeks ago, I witnessed a moment that reminded me why integrity will always matter more than reputation. I met an employee who believed that honesty did not need to defend itself, because truth eventually speaks for its own." Ethan lowered his eyes, realizing she was speaking about him, even though she had never mentioned his name. Charlotte looked toward the back of the room. "Mr. Ethan Carter, would you please join me on stage?" Hundreds of employees turned simultaneously, creating a path through the center aisle as Ethan slowly walked forward carrying the same old toolbox that had followed him through countless ordinary workdays. Every step felt unreal. When he reached the stage, Charlotte extended her hand with sincere respect. Ethan accepted it quietly. Turning back toward the audience, Charlotte smiled gently. "This man reminded me that leadership is not measured by titles, offices, or wealth. It is revealed by the choices we make when no one believes anyone important is watching." The applause that followed echoed throughout the ballroom, but Ethan barely heard it. In a single unforgettable moment, he finally understood why Charlotte always seemed so comfortable inside every corner of the resort, why every employee greeted her with quiet respect, and why her wisdom had never sounded like someone simply passing through. The greatest truth she had hidden was not her wealth. It was her decision to let someone know her heart before revealing the extraordinary life behind her name. The standing ovation inside the grand ballroom seemed to last forever. Yet Ethan Carter wished only to slip quietly back to the maintenance department and finish the work he had left behind. He stood beside Charlotte Hayes with the same weathered toolbox resting near his feet, looking far more comfortable in silence than beneath hundreds of admiring eyes. When the applause finally softened, Charlotte stepped toward the podium once more, her expression warm rather than triumphant. "There is one more announcement I would like to make," she said. "Today we are creating a new leadership position across Hayes Hospitality Group. This role is not about managing buildings. It is about protecting the culture that makes people feel valued, respected, and welcome. It requires integrity before experience and character before authority." She turned toward Ethan with a gentle smile. "Mr. Carter, I would be honored if you would become our first director of guest experience and employee care." The ballroom erupted into applause again, but Ethan remained still for several seconds. He looked toward Charlotte with honest humility. "I appreciate your confidence," he said softly, "but I have never wanted an executive title." Charlotte nodded with understanding. "That is exactly why I believe you are the right person. You have already been leading people without realizing it." Ethan thought quietly about Emma, about every promise he had made to her, and about the example he hoped she would remember long after she grew up. Finally, he smiled. "If accepting this responsibility allows me to keep serving people the way I always have, then I would be grateful to accept." The months that followed brought changes no one could have predicted. Hayes Grand Resort became known throughout the country not simply for its breathtaking views or elegant accommodations, but for something far more meaningful. Guests wrote letters describing how every employee treated them with genuine kindness. New staff members quickly learned that respect was not reserved for executives. It belonged equally to housekeepers, gardeners, cooks, maintenance workers, and every visitor who walked through the front doors. Charlotte continued taking quiet walks around Crystal Lake without announcing her arrival, and more often than not, Ethan joined her before the resort awakened each morning. Their conversations never centered on wealth or business. Instead, they spoke about Emma's school projects, the changing seasons, favorite books, and the simple joy of watching the sunrise paint the lake with gold. One snowy evening, just before Christmas, Charlotte arrived at Ethan's modest home, carrying a tin of homemade sugar cookies that she admitted were not baked quite perfectly. Emma opened the front door before Ethan could reach it. "Charlotte," she exclaimed happily before wrapping both arms around her. The house smelled of cinnamon, fresh pine, and hot chocolate. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with handmade ornaments collected over many years. Nothing inside the home reflected extraordinary wealth, yet everything reflected extraordinary love. The three of them spent the evening decorating cookies, laughing over uneven icing, and listening to old Christmas songs while snow drifted quietly beyond the windows. Later, as the fire crackled softly inside the stone fireplace, Emma climbed onto the sofa between the two adults she trusted most. She looked first at her father, then at Charlotte, before asking in a voice so gentle it almost blended into the quiet room, "May I ask you something?" Charlotte smiled warmly. "Of course." Emma reached for Charlotte's hand. "Would it make you happy if one day I called you Mom?" For a long moment, no one spoke. Tears quietly filled Charlotte's eyes as she looked toward Ethan. He smiled with peaceful gratitude and gently placed his hand over both of theirs. Charlotte squeezed Emma's little hand with all the tenderness in her heart. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "if your heart ever chooses that name, I will spend every day trying to deserve it." Emma leaned forward and hugged her tightly while Ethan watched the two people he loved most become a family in the quietest, most beautiful way imaginable. Outside, fresh snow covered the world in peaceful white, But inside that little home, warmth, forgiveness, and hope had already transformed 3 ordinary lives forever. In the end, it was never an accident that changed everything. It was quiet dignity, faithful promises, and the courage to choose grace over judgment that opened the door to a future none of them had ever imagined.